You feel the walls hum faintly around you, the kind of silence that only exists when the world above is holding its breath. You imagine alarms in the distance, fallout drifting down like grey snow, and the question presses in immediately. If everything outside fails, where do you actually survive? During the Cold War, governments poured concrete into the ground, selling bunkers as the ultimate answer. But buried beneath that fear was a quieter idea that worked better, cost less, and asked something uncomfortable. What if survival wasn't about hiding deeper, but about understanding how humans had always endured invisible threats? This is the mystery that unsettles you, because the trick wasn't secret technology or military hardware. It was a way of thinking about air, movement, and human behavior that most people forgot the moment the sirens stopped. You're standing at the edge of that forgotten logic now, looking back at a time when survival manuals quietly removed pages that were too simple, too effective, and too hard to control. The Cold War taught people to fear exposure, but it also revealed something else, something almost ironic. The safest solution was often the least dramatic one, and it didn't look like a bunker at all. It looked like an ordinary space, used in an extraordinary way, waiting for someone to notice it again. You have to place yourself inside the fear of that era to understand why this mattered. Families practiced drills in basements, school children memorized duck-and-cover routines, and survival became something you rehearsed, not something you understood. Bunkers promised certainty, thick walls, sealed doors, and the illusion of control, but they also created new dangers that no one liked to talk about. Stale air, panic, isolation, and the simple reality that most people would never reach a bunker in time. Governments knew this, and quietly, engineers and civil defense planners began looking for alternatives that worked within normal life instead of against it. Imagine being told that your best chance wasn't a reinforced shelter, but the way your home already interacted with the world around it. This is where the lived reality becomes uncomfortable, because it suggests survival depended less on equipment and more on awareness. People learned through drills and real disasters that airflow mattered more than walls, that temperature stability mattered more than depth, and that human endurance failed faster in sealed spaces than in adaptable ones. Over time, these lessons were simplified, stripped of nuance, and eventually replaced by slogans and concrete. What remained was a half-remembered system that quietly saved lives, even as it vanished from official advice. Imagine this. Instead of sealing yourself away, you let your space breathe in a controlled, deliberate way. This is where it changes. Cold War planners rediscovered principles humans had used for centuries, guiding air gently rather than blocking it, using layers and angles instead of brute force. The core idea was simple enough to overlook. Air wants to move, heat wants to rise, and people survive longer when their environment stays stable instead of extreme. Homes, schools, and public buildings were quietly adapted to create zones where fresh air could circulate without letting danger rush in. You weren't hiding underground, you were creating a buffer between yourself and the outside world. Here's the clever part. This system didn't rely on power, machinery, or perfect conditions. It relied on physics that never stopped working. Warm air drifting upward, cooler air settling, pressure differences doing the work for you. In emergencies, people were taught to adjust behavior rather than structures, opening and closing spaces strategically, using the building itself as protection. It was survival through understanding, not construction. Over time, this knowledge faded because it couldn't be sold easily, and it required trust in the user rather than the structure. It worked because it respected the limits of both materials and people. Thick walls can crack, filters can fail, and panic can overwhelm even the strongest shelter, but a system that adapts keeps working even when conditions change. You begin to see why this approach quietly outperformed bunkers in real scenarios. It reduced heat loss without trapping people, diluted contaminants instead of concentrating them, and kept occupants mentally anchored to normal life. That mattered more than planners expected. People think survival is about resisting the environment, but the Cold War revealed that endurance comes from cooperating with it. By allowing gradual exchange instead of total isolation, these spaces avoided the deadly buildup of moisture, heat, and fear. The logic was ancient, borrowed unknowingly from older civilizations that survived harsh climates without modern tools. When pressure waves passed, when temperatures swung, when systems failed, these adaptable spaces recovered on their own. No switches, no locks, no heroic last stands, just steady balance. It wasn't dramatic enough to become legend, and it didn't fit the narrative of total annihilation. But quietly, consistently, it kept people alive. That success made it invisible, because the best survival stories are the ones where nothing appears to happen at all. So why did it disappear? Because fear sells better than patience. As the Cold War intensified, survival messaging became simpler and louder. Bunkers were visible, countable, and reassuring in photographs. Manuals were rewritten, training shortened, and nuance erased. When the immediate threat faded, so did the memory of what actually worked. Technology promised easier answers, mechanical solutions replaced behavioral ones, and resilience was outsourced to devices. New generations grew up believing survival meant fortification, not adaptation. Even today, you can feel that instinct when people talk about disasters. Build stronger, seal tighter, go deeper. The Cold War trick didn't fail. It was abandoned because it didn't fit a world obsessed with control. And once abandoned, it became invisible, dismissed as outdated or irrelevant, even as the same principles quietly reappeared in modern architecture under different names. What was erased from the manuals never stopped working. It just stopped being explained. Now you're living in a time when uncertainty has returned, and suddenly the old questions feel relevant again. You don't need sirens to understand vulnerability. Energy failures, climate extremes, and crowded cities are forcing people to rethink what safety actually means. This is why that forgotten Cold War survival trick matters now. It reminds you that resilience isn't about hiding from the world, but learning how to exist within it under pressure. The most effective solutions are often the least dramatic, built on understanding rather than fear. You start noticing how modern designs quietly echo the past, prioritizing airflow, thermal stability, and human comfort without calling it survival. The lesson is simple but uncomfortable. You don't need to build a bunker to prepare for uncertainty. You need to understand how your environment already works and how to work with it when things go wrong. That knowledge empowers you in ways concrete never can. If this story changes how you think about safety, share it, keep learning, and question the loudest solutions. Sometimes the smartest survival trick is the one history tried to forget, waiting for you to remember it again.